Most men think flirting has an expiration date. Somewhere after your 40s or 50s, when the gray creeps in and the metabolism slows down. Many men quietly assume that the days of being noticed, let alone being flirted with, are long gone. Society doesn't help either. The movies stop casting men your age in romantic roles. Ads shift from cologne and confidence to blood pressure and back pain. And suddenly, many older men fade into a quiet narrative that says, "Your time has passed." But here's the truth. What if it hasn't? What if the attention never stopped? It just changed shape. What if the women around you, the ones in your walking group, at church, in your community class, or even at the coffee shop, are still offering glances, giving signals, and asking subtle questions, but you're not picking up the cues because they don't look like they used to? What if flirtation at 70 isn't a bold wink or a suggestive smile, but something gentler, more intelligent, and more meaningful? You see, women don't stop being interested with age, they evolve. And their ways of showing it become more complex, more layered, and more emotionally mature. The challenge is that most older men never got the memo. The rules changed, but no one told them. They're looking for neon signs when the signals now are whispered hints. They expect direct compliments, but miss the way she remembers the story. About your old dog, or how she always brings an extra tea bag, your favorite one, when you meet for group lunch. If you're a man in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, and you felt invisible, you're not alone. But you might also be wrong. Because women your age may very well still be trying to connect. They're just doing it differently. And the first subtle cue they often use? Curiosity. Not the surface level kind, but the type that's cloaked in casual questions. Let's unpack that. Imagine this. You're sitting at a weekly coffee group, and the woman across from you leans in with a soft smile and says, "So what keeps you busy these days?" Now you might hear that as polite small talk, but it might be something deeper. Because the curiosity question isn't really about your schedule, it's about your story. Women over 60 have lived long enough to know that true connection begins with conversation. They're not asking what you do because they want to compare resumes. They're asking because they want to know what lights you up. What gives your day structure? What makes you smile? And more importantly, whether there's space in your life for someone else. Unlike the bold flirting of youth, which often shouted for attention, this version of curiosity is a quiet invitation. It says, "I'd like to understand your world, if you'll let me." It's subtle, it's patient, and it's deeply intentional. And yet, so many men brush it off. They answer with one-word replies, assuming she's just being friendly. But here's the thing, if a woman isn't interested, she doesn't ask about your hobbies, your hometown, or how you ended up in this little corner of the world. She doesn't ask what music you like or whether you still ride your old bike. When she asks those things, it's because she's not just passing time, she's looking for connection. Take a man named Paul, 74, who joined a community woodworking class. A woman named Teresa started asking about his old projects. First it was about the table he was refinishing. Then she asked what he used to build when he was younger. Eventually, she asked what made him fall in love with working with his hands in the first place. Paul thought she was just being polite, until she brought him a vintage magazine on classic woodworking, just because it reminded her of their conversation. That's not small talk, that's emotional investment. That's a question with a purpose. The curiosity question is a woman's way of knocking gently on the door of your inner world. She's not barging in. She's not making a scene. She's simply saying, "Tell me more." And if you listen, really listen, you'll hear the warmth behind the words. So the next time a woman asks you something that feels a little too personal, a little too specific, pause before you brush it off. She might not be asking if you're single, but she is asking if there's room in your story for someone new. And that's the most beautiful kind of question there is. 2. The teasing compliment. Examples. "I bet you were trouble when you were younger," or "that smile says you're up to something." Meaning, light, playful remarks that invite you to flirt back. It's often how women raised with modesty signal romantic interest without being too direct. Now that we've opened the door with curiosity, let's talk about what happens when a woman wants to linger just a bit longer in your presence, but doesn't want to make it obvious. She may not say she finds you attractive. She may not confess to thinking about you outside these conversations. But instead she might tease. A soft jab, a playful smile, a comment that walks the line between compliment and comedy. That's where the second hidden signal shows up, the teasing compliment. And trust me, it's not the same as the compliments you remember from your 20s. Women over 60 have honed their wit like a finely sharpened tool. They understand that vulnerability doesn't always feel safe, so instead of saying, "You're handsome," they might say, "I bet you got into a lot of trouble back in the day." That's not an accusation, it's an invitation. When a woman teases you like that, she's not just playing around. She's doing something far more intimate. She's saying, "I'm paying attention to you. I notice your energy. I notice the spark in your eyes, and I like it." These teasing compliments are disarming on purpose. They make you laugh. They loosen the moment. And they give you a chance to flirt back without either of you feeling exposed. Think of it as a dance. A step forward, a little side shuffle, a smile exchanged in rhythm. But many men misread it. They think she's just being cheeky, or worse, making fun. But here's the secret: when a woman jokes with you, especially in a way that feels personal, she's creating a shared language. That language is where connection happens. Take Marcus, 70, who volunteers at a local theater. One of the costume designers, Claire, often teased him about his stubbornness with tools. "You must have been a rebel in high school, bet you didn't follow directions then either." At first, he brushed it off. Then she started asking him to help her fix props, because only troublemakers like you know how to cheat the system. When she eventually invited him for a drink after rehearsal, Marcus realized those jokes were never just about tools. They were about trust. They were her way of saying, "I enjoy you." This kind of teasing is subtle emotional flirting. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It says, "I see the spark in you. Do you still see it in yourself?" For men who've been through the emotional wear and tear of life divorces, deaths, disappointments, this kind of attention can feel like sunlight after a long gray winter. And yet, so many men dismiss it because they've forgotten what flirtation feels like when it's soft, not loud. But if you pause, if you smile back and play along, you're accepting the rhythm she's offering. And that rhythm? It's intimacy. Disguised as banter, it's attraction masked in mischief. And it's one of the clearest signs she wants to get closer. Think of teasing not as poking fun, but as poking a bubble just enough to see if there's something real underneath. The key is to respond with presence, not defensiveness. If she says, "You look like you could charm a room," don't brush it off. Say, "Only when I have a good reason to." That's how the dance continues. The teasing compliment isn't shallow, it's strategic. It lets her reveal interest without fear of rejection. and it invites you to reveal just a little more of yourself. So the next time a woman drops a witty line your way, pay attention. She might not be joking, she might be signaling. And if you listen with more than your ears, you might just hear the truth beneath the humor. 3. The unnecessary favor. Examples: bringing you cookies you didn't ask for, or offering a ride even when it's slightly inconvenient. Meaning, women express interest by doing thoughtful, unnecessary things, subtle ways of inserting themselves into your life and building emotional connection. So we've covered curiosity and we've explored teasing. But let's now dive into one of the most easily overlooked forms of female affection, the unnecessary favor. Now at first glance you might think, what's the big deal about a woman bringing cookies or helping you carry a bag? But pause for a moment, because sometimes what feels like a simple favor is actually a quiet declaration of care. You see, in the later chapters of life, many women have learned that vulnerability doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't have to arrive in grand romantic gestures or candlelit declarations. Sometimes it comes tucked inside a casserole dish. Sometimes it shows up in the form of remembering to bring an umbrella for you, even though you never mentioned needing one. And sometimes it looks like a woman offering to do something for you that you never asked for and didn't even know you needed. These are not just good deeds. These are subtle bridges, and they are built with precision. Let's talk about the psychology behind this. When someone does something for you that isn't required, especially without being prompted, it suggests two things: emotional availability and intention. Women raised in more traditional decades were often taught not to make the first move directly, so instead they learn to express interest through service. Not in a submissive way, but in a generous, thoughtful, relational way. They find ways to place themselves in your life, not intrusively, but intentionally. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the message behind the muffins. Take Eleanor and Bill. Bill, 69, met Eleanor at a local photography club. One day, she showed up with a second lens cloth. "Just in case you forgot yours," she said. Then a week later, she brought a thermos of coffee and said, "I know you mentioned last week you like it black with cinnamon. Figured I'd make some." Bill smiled, said thanks, but never thought much of it. It wasn't until Eleanor offered to ride with him to an out-of-town photo hike saying, "You shouldn't drive alone, it's a long day," that it clicked. These weren't one-off favors. They were emotional footprints. Each gesture a small act of being seen, of being remembered, of being valued. And here's something you may not realize. For many women, doing something kind for you isn't just about making your life easier. It's about being part of your life. It's about being near you, spending time with you, and quietly supporting you in a world that too often tells older men they must do everything alone. The problem is, too many men don't see it. Conditioned by decades of self-reliance, they wave off help. They say, "No thanks, I've got it," thinking they're being polite. But what they're really doing, unknowingly, is rejecting a woman's effort to connect. So here's what you need to remember when a woman goes out of her way to do something just a little extra, whether it's remembering your dog's name, helping you fix your garden fence, or sewing a button you didn't even notice was loose. Don't just see the task. See the heart behind it. She's not trying to prove she's useful. She's trying to show she's present. And that presence is a form of affection. It's a love language that doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to be noticed and acknowledged. And maybe, if you're ready, welcomed. Because when you say yes to her favor, you're not just accepting help. You're accepting her place in your world. And that small yes can mean everything. 4. The memory test. Examples. She recalls details from previous conversations like your dog's name or your favorite coffee. Meaning, if she remembers small, seemingly unimportant things, it's because she was emotionally engaged and wants you to know she was truly listening. At this point, you may already be thinking differently about the women around you, realizing that subtle questions, teasing remarks, and generous gestures may have meant more than you gave them credit for. But now we move into a signal that's even more delicate, more easily dismissed, yet more telling than perhaps any of the others, the memory test. And no, this isn't about testing your own memory, it's about how closely hers is tracking yours. When a woman brings up something you said weeks ago, something seemingly small like your favorite kind of jam, or the story you told about fixing up your old shed with your brother, that's not chance. That's intentional. That's emotional bookkeeping. And it's powerful. Because in a world that constantly rushes forward, choosing to remember is an act of intimacy. It means that moment you thought was passing, she filed it away. Because it mattered. Because you mattered. Think about this. Memory isn't just a mental function. It's an emotional filter. Our brains discard 90% of what we hear. So what sticks? What strikes a chord? What lingers in our emotional bloodstream? So when a woman asks you, "How's your hip doing?" You mentioned you were going in for surgery last month. She's not just being polite. She's signaling that you registered, that your story left a mark. And for many women, especially those over 60, this is one of the safest ways to express interest without overstepping. Because let's be honest, compliments can be misread. Favors can be declined. Teasing can fall flat. But memory? That's neutral on the surface. It's wrapped in kindness. But beneath it, it's warmth. Let me give you a real example. Ron, 73, attends a small local writing circle. He once read a short story about taking his granddaughter fishing in Maine. He mentioned it only briefly. A month later, another woman in the group, named June, asked him, "Did you ever end up getting that pink fishing rod for her birthday?" He was floored. Not just because she remembered, but because she remembered the detail that mattered, the color, the birthday. The bond, that's not just recollection. That's emotional investment. And yet, so many men miss this cue entirely. They smile, nod, maybe even thank her, but they don't see it as a sign. But here's why it is. When someone brings up a memory that you shared, what they're really saying is, you made an impression. And when she remembers not just the facts, but the feelings behind them, that's her way of saying, I care. Because women who aren't interested don't carry your stories around in their minds. They don't bring them up weeks later with a thoughtful tone. They don't weave your narrative back into the present unless they want to stay connected to you. So here's the challenge. When a woman brings up something personal from the past, don't downplay it. Don't assume everyone else remembered it too. Pause, meet her eyes, and say something like, "That means a lot that you remembered." Because that moment is not about nostalgia, it's about now. It's about whether you recognize that she's been listening and whether you're ready to listen back. Think of it this way. Remembering is the emotional equivalent of a breadcrumb trail. She's laying out pieces of connection, hoping you'll follow the path. Not to a destination, but to a deeper version of yourself, the one who is still seen, still valued, still worth remembering. And when you acknowledge that trail, you're not just affirming her effort, you're affirming your own worth too. 5. The compliment in disguise. Examples: you're not like most men your age, or you have such a calming presence. Meaning, these compliments aren't about looks, but about character and emotional impact, often overlooked by men, but they carry deeper admiration and attraction. We've journeyed through subtle curiosity, teasing wit, unexpected favors, and the quiet power of memory. Now we arrive at perhaps the most emotionally layered signal a woman can offer: the compliment in disguise. This is the fifth cue, and it may be the most difficult to spot because it doesn't wear the costume of a traditional compliment. It doesn't announce itself with "you're attractive" or "you look great for your age." Instead, it slides into conversation like a whisper that lingers in your chest hours after the words were spoken. It sounds like "you're not like most men," or "you have such a steady presence, it's comforting." It might be, "there's something calming about you." And the truth is, most older men miss it, because this isn't the kind of compliment they were trained to recognize. It doesn't point to the surface, it points to the soul. You see, women, especially in later life, have learned to compliment with care. They know the value of nuance. They understand the emotional risk in saying too much too soon. So they compliment you in ways that feel safe, subtle, and deeply revealing if you know how to read between the lines. These disguised compliments are not about how you look, but about how you make people feel. And that is no small thing. In a world where men are so often evaluated by their productivity, their past accomplishments, or the size of their paycheck, a compliment that acknowledges who you are, not just what you've done, can be life-altering. But here's the twist. Most men shrug it off. Conditioned to deflect praise, they respond with a polite nod, a chuckle, or worse, they self-deprecate. But what they're missing is the opportunity for emotional connection. Because when a woman says, "you're easy to talk to," or "you make people feel safe," what she's really saying is, "I notice something in you that stands out, and I like it." Let me tell you about Alan, a 72-year-old who volunteers at a local church group. During one of the small group discussions, a woman named Diane turned to him and said, "You know, it's rare to meet a man who listens without interrupting. You make people feel heard." Alan thanked her, smiled, and moved on. It wasn't until days later, when she brought it up again, this time privately, that he realized it wasn't just flattery. It was appreciation, and possibly admiration. This kind of compliment isn't just kind, it's emotionally intelligent. It bypasses surface attraction and touches something deeper. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because in later life, attraction isn't just about chemistry, it's about resonance, about shared peace, about emotional tone. So the next time a woman tells you, "you've got a calming energy," or "there's something different about the way you carry yourself," don't just hear the words. Feel the message underneath. She's not observing you, she's admiring you. She's not making small talk, she's offering a mirror, showing you something you may have forgotten about yourself. And if you let that land, if you receive it, not with skepticism but with gratitude, something remarkable can happen: connection. Because a compliment like that isn't casual, it's chosen, it's offered, and it's yours to honor. So now we've uncovered the 5 subtle signals, those gentle nudges from women that so often go unnoticed by men who assume their time of being seen, admired, or desired has passed. But here's the truth that society rarely says out loud. The end of one chapter doesn't mean the book is closed. In fact, for many men in their 60s, 70s, or beyond, the relationships that form later in life can be the most sincere, the most emotionally balanced, and the most healing. Why? Because they're built not on flash but on substance, not on performance but on presence. And these 5 Qs, curiosity, teasing, favors, memory, and disguised compliments, aren't just tricks or tactics. They're doorways, invitations, evidence that human connection still wants to reach you, even if it's dressed in quieter clothes. Maybe you've felt invisible at times. Maybe you've wondered if anyone notices you anymore. If your stories still matter. If your presence still leaves a mark. And the answer, if you've been paying attention, is yes. You are being noticed. You are being remembered. You are still very much part of the emotional conversation happening around you. The question isn't whether it's happening. The question is whether you're tuned in enough to hear it. Because for older men, the challenge isn't a lack of interest from others. It's a lack of awareness of how that interest now shows up. And when you shift your perception, when you start recognizing the curiosity as connection, the teasing as a test, the favors as affection, the memory as meaning, and the disguised compliment as admiration, everything changes. You no longer see yourself as past your prime. You begin to see yourself as wise, warm, and worthy. And you stop settling for the silence of assumptions and start listening for the music that still plays underneath the conversations. So the next time a woman asks about your past with more interest than required, the next time she remembers your favorite sandwich or laughs at your dry joke a little longer than necessary, pause. Don't look away. Don't retreat into self-doubt. Respond. Not with bravado, but with presence. Smile. Offer something real in return. Because in that exchange, you might just find a new spark, a second act. A relationship not rushed by youth, but matured by life. These 5 signs are not just about romance. They're about connection. They're about being seen in a world that often looks past people once they turn gray. And they're a reminder that as long as you're still here, the chance to be loved genuinely, deeply, even quietly is still here too. You don't need to become someone new. You don't need to be more charming, more athletic, or more accomplished. You simply need to be present, to listen, to receive, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she's been waiting for you to notice that she's noticing you. And once you do, everything softens, everything opens. Because love never truly retires, it just evolves. And maybe the most beautiful version of it is the one that speaks in soft questions, warm smiles, and the simple phrase, "I remembered."